The industry is shown at the beginning of part 1 of the Antman movie recap, where one scientist made particles, but other scientists of the chemical industry wanted to steal those particles. So the scientist is irritated by whoever made the particles, and resigns from the agency. So it was a flashback. Now let's go to the current time. Now this scientist has his own agency. He also has a daughter, but his daughter tells him that, "Dad, you are old now. I will be able to take over the management of this agency together with my co-worker." During those days when the scientist is not visiting the agency, then his daughter and her co-worker build a yellow dress that was like an Ant-Man replica. They wanted to abuse this costume. They wanted to become the richest soon and sold this costume at a high price, which was absolutely wrong. On the other hand, the main character of this film comes into the picture. His name is Scott. He was a robber and was returning after a great punishment. He goes to meet his daughter, who is pretty, but his wife married someone else after divorcing him. Scott had to spend his life somehow, so he starts looking for a job, but no one offers him a job. You say you have a criminal record. He worries. He moves to meet his boyfriend. His friend tells him, "You tried hard to find a job. It's not your fault that no one is offering you a job. You know how to rob perfectly. You can start the heist again." Then Scott says, "Yeah, I will have to do this to survive." Scott's friend tells him about the location of the house, that there is such a thing as you will be richer when you get it. Scott was very excited. He breaks into the house and damages the safe. He checks, there is no money or diamond. There was only the Ant-Man costume. He tells his friend, "What a useless thing. I thought it would be an expensive thing." Meanwhile, the police also arrive there. He is arrested again and brought to prison, where he meets the scientist who made the chemical. He says to him, "Do not be afraid. It was my trick. You can reach for that costume and wear it, because I wanted to know if you're up for it or not. That was an attribute of that costume, because you could change the size, wear it. This means you can be increased or decreased." Several ants bring an Ant-Man costume where Scott is trapped. Scott puts it on immediately, and he gets out of jail. He goes straight to the scientist who tells him, "My daughter built a replica of this costume. It is in yellow, which is more technological. He wants to sell it, but I will never allow it, because she built it using my technology. I chose you so you could go to her and bring me the costume." Scott agrees with him because he helped him get out of jail, and he goes straight to the agency where the scientist's daughter was present. Scott asks, spotting her, "Why did you come here?" So Scott is telling the truth. Now the scientist's daughter says, "Listen, if it's true, I regret cheating on my father. I'm keeping him away from this agency so I can build this costume. If he really wants to find a person who can use it properly, then it's okay. But before that I will test you. I will also train you because you can really pull off this costume." In agreement, Scott starts training from him, how he must use this costume. The scientist's daughter feels guilty for her father. He tells his father he is going to meet him. "I still thought you and your mother were divorced, and that chemical was everything to you. Today I ask you, tell me, where is mother?" The scientist says, "My daughter, I also built a costume for your mother, and it was called the wasp suit. She could also fly. One day she shrunk to a small size while we were on a mission, but she was lost somewhere from where she cannot be returned, because it has a rule. It has a size reduction limit. You cannot shrink beyond its limit, but your mother crossed the line. I miss him to this day." Scott also listens to their conversation. He moves to the scientist and tells him, "You never told me that the scientists call Scott. I haven't given you the suit yet. Keep that in mind. Never reduce your size too much, otherwise you will be lost." The scientist says, "Scott, the time has come that I am sending you on your first mission, because you received training on how to use the Ant-Man suit." She tells him, "You have to go to the agency I left many years ago, and you have to steal a secret device and go there." Scott tells him, "Don't worry," and he's moving to that agency. Scott was wearing that red and black Ant-Man costume, because the scientist cheated them, and he will start a partnership with the agency where the scientist resigned. Scott steals the secret device from that place. Then he discovers that the scientist's daughter's co-worker is also there, who is doing some experiments on the yellow Ant-Man suit, although he made an appointment to negotiate it. Now the man will show off this suit at that meeting. Then Ant-Man reaches there with his swarm of ants. It spoils the whole system of the place, and he gets to the place where the yellow Ant-Man suit was placed. Scott, who was now Ant-Man, got there. He was about to steal the suit and then the co-worker showed up. He says to him, "I knew you would approach here grumpily." He captures Scott, a scientist, and his daughter. Scott, who was Ant-Man, hits on an idea. He shrinks his size to save the scientist and his daughter. At the same time, an agent will appear there. Whoever starts running steals the pattern of that Ant-Man suit. There were explosives set to save the yellow suit. The explosives are immediately detonated. Scott already saved the scientist and his daughter, and they came out of that agency. The agency is appalling at first glance. Now that co-worker didn't ruin his yellow costume in those explosives. Of course, he arranged something. He saved the yellow costume. Now he wears it himself. Scott can't take it. She immediately moves to him. Now the battle begins between them. Scott is at an advantage because he learned how to use the Ant-Man suit, while the man did not gain the ability to use that Ant-Man suit, whereas that suit was more technological. So he becomes an aggressive thinker if he learns this skill. When he is unable to do anything, he goes straight to Scott's house. He captures his daughter to blackmail him. Scott quickly returns to his house and begins to fight the co-worker. There are enough fights between them. He thinks of an idea. Why didn't I go inside that suit when I shrunk? That means I can disrupt the entire system of this suit. And he does the same. His plan was successful. The man's yellow costume is completely destroyed. But Scott made a mistake here. He reduced his size too much. He entered the quantum realm, from which it was not easy to return. Where did the scientist's wife also disappear? He is quite angry. He then notices a capsule, which he puts into his suit, and it begins to regulate, causing time to reverse. And that place also publishes Scott from here. Everyone is very excited when they enter the macroscopic world. And the scientist asks Scott, "How did you do that? How did you get back from that realm? I am very pleased with your action. You don't know that I'm very happy, because my wife will be able to come back too." She respects him too much. At the end of the movie, the scientist brings his daughter to the site where he shows her the new replica costume. It was a replica of the wasp. He tells her that it is my new creation, and the part I'm finishing on this scene. Part 2 of this Ant-Man and the Wasp movie will now be explained. The film begins in flashback, when the woman lost the scientist. 30 years have passed since this event, when the scientist's daughter was too young. In fact, that day the scientist and his wife had to go on a mission, where they had to prevent a rocket from falling into the city. He was the biggest, so they didn't gain the ability to disrupt him. So the scientist's wife reduced her size too much, so that she could warp his system and go into it. And the scientist could not search for his wife from that time until now. Now he is telling this story to his daughter in present day. He also advises her, "My daughter, no need to be sad, because your mother will be back soon." He starts giving the example of Scott, that Scott also went to that realm, but he somehow gets out of that place. That means your mother can come back from there too. The scientist says to his daughter, 30 years have passed. Your mother doesn't seem to understand the obvious. How is the capsule used? So we will invent such a device so that we can move there without shrinking. Now the scene changes to the character of Scott, who was very happy with his daughter. He was with her. The police told him, "Since you have the Ant-Man ability, you won't reveal it to people." One day Scott is playing with his daughter. Suddenly he steps out of the house. The police will detect it using a tracking system, so they approach his house. FBI agents are with them. They ask Scott, "Didn't you go out?" Scott's daughter confronts them before Scott can say a word. He asks, "Why are you teasing my father? You were just playing with me." So the FBI agents begin to explain to his daughter. Here it is revealed why he asked to stay in his own house. Because he became Captain America's partner despite the police warning. So their partnership brought much destruction. Then the government announced Ant-Man signed the agreement that this will not happen next time. Antman didn't make it, so he was punished by staying in his house for 3 years. It was actually a house arrest and he couldn't go out during this time. FBI agents tell his daughter, "Only 3 days left to serve 3-year sentence. We instruct your father to stay in his house, but he's breaking the law." Then the little girl asks them, "Will my father be released after 3 days?" They say, "Yes, of course." Meanwhile, Ant-Man's ex-wife and her husband arrive. They ask him to marry their daughter. They say, "We must go for recreation. After some time we will let her go." Now Scott's daughter is gone, so he had to spend 3 days alone in his house. So she enjoys singing and dancing. Once Scott falls asleep in the bath, and he dreams that he is in the form of a lady, and that woman was none other than the scientist's wife, which was lost for many years. Scott wakes up and worries, and they will reveal it to the scientist through a call. Then Scott sleeps. When he wakes up, he is with the scientist's daughter. He asks her, "What place are you taking me to? You don't know that I am legally bound at home." Then the girl tells him, "You don't have to worry about it. I left someone there who acts like you, and FBI agents will never be able to suspect like you and me. We both have to go on a mission." He takes Scott directly to his father's lab. The scientist says, "Scott, I'm making a device that will go into the quantum realm, where my wife was imprisoned. However, it detects the error after a short period of work. And along with that, you called me that you dreamed about my wife. It means we have a hunch that my wife is still alive, and we can save her. And I called you here to tell me, what exactly is in that place, because you could break free from there. Now everyone is trying to control the device together, but again and again it detected the error and wouldn't start. After checking, he finds that a regulator is required to operate this device. Now they meet the man who had the controller. Now that the man calls the daughter a scientist, I will give you that controller on condition. After this quest you will have to sell your lab to me. I got a man who can give $700 million for it. Then the scientist's daughter says, you are negotiating with us. I will never sell my lab. And she goes back without taking the controller. But she is wearing the wasp suit that his father built before she left the place. And he steals the controller. Then the spirit he created appears there. And that stops her. Of course, the spirit has the ability to be invisible. And it can transition from anything. And Antman and Wasp also had this epithet. How they increase or decrease their size. Now a big fight begins between them. And they fight each other using their expertise and abilities. But it seems the ghost was more trained. He takes back the controller from the scientist's daughter, and also gain control of their lab. Now the scientist has left empty-handed, so he gets worried. He says, I have a professor friend. I was struggling a lot with my boyfriend then when my wife lost at that place. How could my wife somehow return from that place? It is possible that he will help me one more time. Now 3 of them are moving in with that professor, and they start talking to each other. But the scientist notices that the same ghost has appeared to him. But is he in shock when he thinks, what is he doing at your place? You are all united with each other. Then the professor tells him, stop. I reveal the whole story. The professor says to the scientist, remember we were bosom friends. But you start to think, your manufactured particle is being stolen by other scientists. You accuse them. So one of the scientists who was a good friend of yours, he began plotting against you in anger. But because of this, he was also expelled from the agency. How will the research be conducted if everyone joins the fights? So he starts researching it on his own to build his suit, and I also accompanied him. But one day there was a big explosion in that lab. It causes the death of many people. Only a small child named Ghost survived there. I took care of her, so she is with me. You will realize it. He is a real ghost. However, she suffers from a disease that hurts her. Don't think badly of her. She tried to steal quantum energy from your lab because she wants to cure her. Because she is done with this disease. Noticing these abilities, the agency trained her to use them properly. And they take her as part of their agency. And she also got a tech suit. Then she started murdering. At that time, our laboratory was also destroyed. So I brought her here. Now we work together. That professor tied 3 of them up. Now the 3 of them were distracted because they wanted to somehow get their lab back. They couldn't limit their lab to a ghost. The 3 of them come from there and move to the forest. And they are expanding their lab. And they start their device after putting their effort into it. Now this device does not detect any error. So everyone is excited. That machine over there is signaling. Because of this cause, Scott and the scientist's wife are connected to each other. The mistakes that were an obstacle to bringing a woman scientist into the macroscopic world. Scott fixes all these bugs. Then someone calls the police. These people conduct strange experiments. The police officers also had a bond with the workers of this agency, and they are told where the scientist is. So they come to that forest together, and they seize the scientist and his daughter. At that time Scott comes there, who has gone to his house, and he saves them both. That ghost also approached there, and takes control of the lab again. But Scott takes the device back from her. And the scientist travels to his wife's place through this device. As he went there, the scientist and his equipment shrank. The scientist begins to identify the location of his wife. But there were many objects moving around him, so it wasn't child's play. On the other hand, the ghost also escapes and gains control of the lab, because she only had 2 to 3 weeks to stabilize. But there was also a man after the spirit of his controller. He gained control of the lab and sailed on the ship. But Antman is wise here. It will increase its size, and jumps out of the water. She moves to that ship and regains control of the lab from him. A scientist can also be seen on the other side, who is looking for his wife for a long time. He was finally looking for his wife. A scientist gets his wife into his device. On the contrary, the scientist and his daughter also seize this laboratory. They are increasing the size of this lab. Now the scientist and his wife were about to come from there. When they come out, the ghost is there too. The scientist's wife tells her she noticed. I know how much you suffer from this disease. He grabs her hand, and the spirit begins to heal from her illness, and she returns to an ordinary girl again. This means that the scientist's wife had this good quality, but the police were still there and wanted to arrest them. Scott got an idea and increased his size, and he's standing in front of the building, and he behaves in such a way that he hides others behind him. There the police are distracted and try to drive them. but Scott had something planned. Meanwhile, the scientist and his daughter escaped from there. Scott shrunk and ran away as well. 3 days had passed when Scott returned to his house, so the FBI also releases him from house arrest. Now he was finally freed. The scientist and his wife were also mutually satisfied, and the scientist's daughter began to live with Scott, and she also hugged his daughter. Here the recap of the movie ends with an upbeat ending. Thanks for watching.